Wonderful. Win, win, win. That is going to be the way we solve this. And I think that, Corinna, as you said, there's so many different industries that this model, this paradigm could be applied to, whether it's travel and airlines and so many others. And so, again, good to be here at Citigroup because it's institutions like this that sometimes apply these paradigms to different industries as well. Well, we are going to now welcome a panel to the front and offer up a chef perspective. And so I'm looking for Gail Simmons here to see where she is. And there she is, absolutely. And she's going to come in to offer about really, in certain ways, the approach that food, and we've seen in the slides this morning how much agriculture and food is a consumer of water, and it's also a reflection of our value system. If there's anything I think of when I think of from farm to fork, I think of Sweden. The Swedes walk the walk when it comes to organic food, fresh food. I mean, my 6-year-old daughter, as I said last night, she eats moose meat, she eats crayfish, she eats all kinds of fresh vegetables, and I feel so lucky that she spent her formative years partly in Sweden. And so I am going to be listening closely to this panel. We also have on it the chef from our wonderful dinner last night, Emma Bengtsson, and a number of others. But Gail, I turn it over to you right now. Thank you.
Thank you all so much, and thank you so much for the Swedish Chamber of Commerce. Really happy to be here today. My Swedish connection is a dotted line. I have spent a long time with a very close friend who has been my Swedish ambassador in America, Marcus Samuelsson, joining us today, who started off at a very young age in New York City as a chef here after being not born but raised in Sweden, and he's going to talk to us as well today. He's from Mr. Carlo. Marcus, are you here?
Yes.
All right.
Check, attend. Thank you, Gail.
Thank you. Emma Benson, the executive chef of Aquavit here in New York City. Just gonna have my mic turned on. Very loud voice to begin with, clearly. Frederick Rasilius from Aska in Brooklyn. And Chef, oh, there we are. Hi. And there we are, Amanda Cohen from Dirt Candy on the Lower East Side. These four chefs not only are four of the best chefs living and working in New York today, they all have very specific and interesting perspectives, I think, on being a chef in New York City and most importantly on the state of sustainability in the restaurant industry. They cook from very different points of view, but I think we'll see that there's also a lot of commonality in the work that they do. 3 of them are Swedish, and one is proudly Canadian, as am I. So we are all foreigners to some extent, which I think actually gives an interesting perspective on the work that we do specifically in New York, but in America on a whole, because we definitely come to it with a fresh set of eyes and an objectivity, having not been born and raised here. To get started, I would love to just talk a little bit about their backgrounds so that you can get to know them, where they work, their restaurants, and then most importantly, how they came from their home country to New York City and why they chose to be a chef here in New York. So Marcus, let's start with you.
Yes.
Red Rooster Harlem, but pretty recently in the scope of your career. And you also, of course, have Street Bird just down the street, where I just had dinner maybe a week ago. Tell us a quick kind of abridged version of your journey to becoming a chef and ending up in New York City.
I think that, I started really cooking at home. I started cooking really with my family and with my grandmother and my uncles, and fishing and being surrounded by water. And when you think about Sweden, water, we're actually so fortunate because we have different types of waters. Mm-hmm. which you don't think about when you're 10 and 12 that it actually mean anything. But, like on the East Coast, we have like mixed water between sweet and salty, so we get different certain type of seafood. Then we have the cold, clear waters, and then we have the rivers, and then we have the lakes. So you're around natural product, you're around luxury without thinking about it. So when I went fishing on the West Coast, I ate luxury food without thinking about it as luxury. Fresh mackerel, fresh cod, that was poor man's cooking or regular cooking, but it changes your taste. So this idea about taste, access to nature, I think shaped me. We ate mackerel, and then in the rest of the season, when I went to school, we went foraging, like lingonberries, blueberries, and all of these different things. That is not strange for a Swede, like which I'm sure Frederick and Emma can relate to as well. But all of these things really shapes your taste buds. So when I started cooking in France and in Switzerland, my taste buds were already shaped by very specific flavors. Mm-hmm. And when I came to New York, I thought that, what was amazing there was that you have the world here, right? Maybe not lingonberries, maybe not cloudberries, but the rest of the world, right? So then how do you create this marriage in terms of your own identity, your own DNA, and the world? And I think that being a chef is really about being on a journey, getting to know yourself. And that evolves as life evolves. And that means also your taste buds evolves in a completely different shape. I grew up with seafood, and the predominant protein we cook now is chicken. I never could have seen that.
No, for
that
sure
stretch.
not. But you were adapting to your environment too.
Yeah.
But I know from spending a lot of meals with you that lingonberry and fresh fish and princess cake still play a big role in your life.
Absolutely.
So you can take the boy out of Sweden.
Yeah.
But you can't necessarily ever really change the ethos of your first loves when it comes to food.
I was laughing about it because last night Emma served us this amazing meal where she had char as a main course. It was an amazing meal. And my favorite fish is char. And tomorrow when I'm cooking for the Beard Foundation with Daniel Hum and a bunch of guys, my main course is going to be char as well.
Did you change that after having Emma's dinner last
night?
Yeah,
it's really like, but just when you grow up with something, seafood in a certain way, no matter where you travel, I think that's really what you think about as your first food, your first love.
For sure. And what about you, Emma? How did you end in New York City, and what was that path to becoming a chef here and being at Aquavit?
All right.
You had big shoes to fill.
Yeah, I was going to say,
but you sort of stomped all over them, so no, that's not.
I love that.
Cooking, it's something that's always been with me, like starting off going out, getting the apples.
Where are you from in Sweden, by the way?
I'm from the West Coast, so I grew up by the water as well. So, but it all started off with baking, actually. Having the ability to do fresh rhubarb pie, apple pie, everything I could find, I would always go out and
the lingonberries?
Get it somewhere. And lingonberries, not specifically going out picking maybe, but just being able to step outside into your yard and get this produce that is in other part of the world so hard to find. And it wasn't until later in life that I pursued my culinary in savory. So I went to school and I started working in Sweden in different restaurants, mainly focusing on Scandinavian Swedish cuisine. It's always been my passion. It's always what I've done. And I always had this thought about moving somewhere else to see the world and see the culinary world from another perspective. And I came to New York on a little short trip almost 10, 12 years ago and completely fell in love with the city. And that ever since then, it's been my goal to come here. And
mission accomplished.
And yeah.
It worked out for you,
actually,
pretty well.
So one day I got a job offer to come and join Aquavit, and it wasn't really a hard decision. I think I already started packing the same night. And So I joined here as a pastry chef, going back to what I learned from the beginning. Up till a year and a half ago, I had the opportunity to step in some really big shoes and see what I could do and get aquavit.
That's a very unusual, just no matter how familiar or unfamiliar you are with the world in restaurant kitchens, it's a very unusual move to be a pastry chef and then become the executive chef. I don't know many chefs who have done that. I mean, some of them have gone on to open their open their own places that have savory components, but to be in a restaurant where you are the pastry chef and then take over the kitchen, you're working with a very sort of inclusive, I don't want to say finite, but your ingredients and your technique are very specified in the pastry kitchen, and becoming the chef and all of a sudden doing everything savory, how did that transition come about?
It wasn't easy, and I spent a lot of months with no sleep trying to catch up on what I learned a long time ago. But I think the worlds, they're not that far away, especially not for me. I don't like sweets to eat, so always in my pastry, I work a lot with savory. Mm-hmm. I try to bring in the natural sweetness of savory kitchen into pastry. And that's how I'm working right now as well. I'm trying to bring my pastry side into the kitchen and the techniques and how you look at certain ingredients. Mm-hmm. And pastry has always been about you take care of everything. There's always something you can do with a leftover product, or you mm-hmm. can bake it into a bread, or there's something to do with everything. Pastry has always been very little about waste. And that's something that I'm taking with me into the kitchen as well, that everything that's being processed, instead of throwing the leftover product in the garbage, it goes into something else. And so I'm trying to utilize both worlds. And
we're going to get back to that in a minute, because I think that's an important piece of the conversation, not only in the kitchen, but in the world as a whole right now, and it's specific to this panel as well, that I want to revisit. So let's hold on to that. Fredrik, how long have you been in New York?
I've been in New York for about 15 years, I think.
And first, how did you decide when you were in Sweden to become a chef? And then how did you decide that New York was where you wanted to settle?
Well, I didn't decide in Sweden that I wanted to become a chef, but I grew up, like both Emma and Marcus, with sort of home cooking, a mother and grandfather who's very much into spending time in nature, picking berries, picking mushrooms, and always, having a dinner, family dinner at 6 o'clock every night with my sister, mom, dad. So, we rarely went out to eat in restaurants, and I didn't know much about the restaurant industry whatsoever until my sister, who was a few years older, got into this, the same field that I am in now. And had some brief stints at restaurants where she had worked or knew the chef, just sort of Christmas breaks or holidays, or just to make some extra money. And then I came to New York on a short trip just to visit, just to explore, and fell in love with the city. And spent 3 months here, went back to Sweden, came back again, and at one point needed a job. Yeah, and I managed to, I took a job in the kitchen just to have some, just to make some money to pay rent, basically. To stay in the city.
So you weren't a chef.
I wasn't a chef
when you first settled here.
No, I studied economics in high school, and I
valuable.
Yeah, and I touched on graphic design and engineering after school, but spending time in the kitchen here, I was like I got super intrigued and fascinated by the whole, especially the experience within the kitchen walls. And it's sort of, it hit me like a lightning bolt, and all of a sudden I felt like it was something I, perhaps wanted to or could pursue as a career.
It's interesting because your experience, you came to New York and cooked in American and French restaurants mostly.
American, French, German, Italian. I've been all
Right,
over
but the
Swedish.
restaurant you ultimately opened is very Swedish.
Right.
Kind of went back to your roots there, correct?
Yes. I mean, so what I felt like, cooking at the time, cooking 10, 15 years ago in general, was very driven by technique, and especially in New York, it was very technique driven, especially in the high-end restaurants. Flavors came from sort of all over the place, and they were put on the plate. And I felt like I could not personally, I couldn't see. They were not the flavors that I grew up with. And I actually spent maybe 7-8 years cooking, not leaving Manhattan very much. And I didn't even know, I spent so much time working, I felt like I was sort of at an old age when I started cooking, even if I was, in my early 20s or so when I really wanted to start cooking. And I felt like I was behind, and I just worked as much as I could and as hard as I could and as many cooks as I could, just to sort of catch up on people who I worked with, who had worked since they were 15 or 14. And
Also, as a young cook, I think you work so hard that it's hard to find time to do anything else anyway.
right. But I started missing nature. I started missing Sweden. I started missing sort of something other than just like working and sleeping in concrete. And I started to explore New York, and I realized that the landscape outside of Manhattan, especially sort of going west and across the bridge and going up north, is not very different from the landscape surrounding Stockholm or going north of Sweden or in general. Like all these state forests and parks and trees is what really. I just missed those scents. I missed the forest. And that's what we try to put onto the plate today. It's sort of like the memory of growing up in Scandinavia and working in New York and finding the similarities between the two.
Right. Parallels that people probably don't see until they're shown them.
Right, because even though they're very different, there are enough similarities where that you can base a cooking on.
Amanda, you've been very patient over there.
Sorry about that.
No.
Your restaurant, Dirt Candy, is a unique place in New York City and very trailblazing for a lot of reasons. It's a vegetable focus, but it's a vegetarian restaurant at a very high level that didn't really exist in the way that it does now, really even 10 years ago. So how did you start cooking, and then how did you land with the idea of creating Dirt Candy?
Well, I started cooking probably slightly different than I think everybody else on this panel, because I did not go out and pick any food. There were no mushrooms or apples in my past. I'm from a family of 5 children, and my siblings are actually much, much older than I am. So the closest sibling in age to me is about 6 years older. And one day when I was 13, the sister closest in age to me had gone off to college, and my mother literally turned to me and said, "I'm done. If you want to eat dinner, figure it out yourself." It's not a story she likes me to repeat, but it's true. So if you see her, you know nothing about that. She'd been cooking for 20 years, and so I totally understand why she did that. But I was also 13 and hungry, and I had to figure out how to eat fast and cook for myself. That's why I really started to cook, and I enjoyed it. It was so much better than doing homework. So I would plan these elaborate meals for 1, sometimes for 3 with my parents, and then I'd be like, oh, but there's no time for homework. That didn't really work out too well. And then I had sort of landed in New York. I came for college 23 years ago. Loved New York. After college, I moved to Hong Kong for 2 years because I really didn't know what I wanted to do, and cooking wasn't really sort of something that I thought I would do. But after 2 years in Hong Kong, I was like, I love to travel, and I need to pay my way So maybe if I, become a better cook, I can use it as my skill, and I can travel the world as a cook. So I came back to New York to cooking school, learned a lot of stuff, never traveled again, and have been here ever since.
Perfect. Again, once you're a cook, you don't have much time for anything.
Exactly.
Here's a question that might seem really obvious. Are you vegetarian?
I am not vegetarian, actually. I eat fish, and I will pretty much try anything if I am drunk. I like to call myself a drunkitarian.
Perfect. Me too.
I like that.
So why a vegetarian restaurant?
Because it's the way I actually like to eat. So I stopped about 10 years ago. I sort of had this epiphany that I was never going to become a better chef until I started tasting what chefs really cared about, which was the protein. I'd go out to these great restaurants, and for the most part, sorry, anybody who's a chef here, what the chefs really cared about was the fish or the meat in the center of the plate, and I wasn't tasting it. I was tasting the side, and 10 years ago, what you were really getting was the side vegetables, maybe like pumpkin ravioli. It was always pumpkin ravioli or like mushroom risotto, and it wasn't very exciting, and I wasn't becoming a better chef. So I sort of was like, okay, if I want to be a better chef, I'm really going to have to taste what chefs care about if I want to compete in this world. And as it turns out, my desire to be a great chef was more important to me than my desire to be a great vegetarian. So that's actually why I started eating vegetables or vegetarian, or I started eating fish. But when I decided to open my restaurant 8 years ago, I was like, but this is crazy. There's a market out there for people like me who want to eat more exciting food. And I sort of looked around, and really I was like, oh my goodness, there are so many fish restaurants and so many chicken restaurants and all these steak restaurants, and there's not a single vegetable restaurant in New York City. And I was like, everybody else is an idiot. I got this. I see a niche market, and I can, win at it, at least for the moment.
Mm-hmm. And it seems to be working.
For right now,
apparently people do like vegetables.
They really, really do.
Thank goodness. And that then brings us, the love of vegetables, but also the love of fish and meat brings us to the fact that as chefs, you all really are dealing with the importance of sustainability every single day. Every morning when you wake up and you see that your delivery, working with your purveyors, the idea of conservation and responsibility to the environment, I think, more than any industry, is right in your hands every day. So what I'm curious about is how you tackle the issues that you face in the restaurant industry specifically that address those issues. And obviously because your restaurant's, one, being vegetarian, so has very specific set of issues, one where you spend a lot of your time focused on foraged ingredients, one on fish, and one more on really, I would say, yes, you have a chicken restaurant, but if I can make the presumption that your restaurants, Marcus, are the ethos of them are really about your community and the evolution of Harlem.
Yep.
And so you all look at sustainability through those lenses, but every day face issues of food cost and waste and quality of product, which I think are so driven by our environment that is rapidly changing. So, Marcus, when you think about what is the issue to you in terms of sustainability in your restaurant that you are faced with that keeps you up at night more than any other?
So I think we have restaurants in Stockholm, we have a restaurant in Bermuda, and we have a restaurant in New York City, right? And those worlds could not be more different. Mm-hmm. But sustainability is definitely something that is important for our customers in all those places. And it's something that we have to think about in all those three different places, right? And what does sustainability mean in Harlem 2015 versus Stockholm versus a place like Bermuda? So this is something that I've thought about a lot. So sustainable for me in Harlem was A, hiring from the community, B, activate farmers market, right? And before we opened the restaurant, there was one farmers market that will open maybe 3 months a year. Now there's 6 farmers markets in Harlem. There's open, not 12 months a year, but they open like 7 to 8 months a year. And not only are they there, we are all the restaurants are active buyers from them.
So you're direct, and that allows consumers and your restaurants
Yeah.
direct to farmer,
Exactly.
cutting out the middleman and making sure that your dollars go to
But
local.
then the other thing that happens also that was very important with that was that a farmer's market in Harlem has to have relevant ingredients to that community and numerous way of paying, right?
Correct.
So you have to take food stamp and you have to pay with Square and like there's all these different,
Right.
so it's just not one answer, right? As a participant of that, you can now drive that dialogue. And actually, there were about 10 farmers markets or markets in Harlem 50 years ago. So even though we've got 6 now, we're still short what it was. So we always think about we moving forward and ahead. We're actually 40%, we're actually 60% behind. In Bermuda, for example, where most of the things that grows, they have wonderful farms, incredible seafood, everything was shipped away to the States.
Yeah. This is a fate of a lot of the islands, I think.
So I'm like, wait a minute. So what do we, so now actually we have, our fisherman, he texts us about 45 minutes before he pulls up to the restaurant. So we have 4 menu items that we don't know what they're gonna be, right? They could be daily fish, they can be daily catch. And that didn't exist. So our job as chefs today are really to drive, obviously to create delicious food and create, a delicious restaurant that people want to come to. But once you sort of achieve that, then it's also, so now all the fishermen in Bermuda, most of them are selling direct to the local restaurant. But it was nobody that thought before that there's a value, there's a customer that wants to buy for that, right? So that's the difference between if you have you're a chef today, you have an audience, and you can really drive that dialogue, you can broadcast it, you can be part of that narrative. And in Stockholm, it's very challenging because the audience, our customer, knows a lot about sustainability. And they make the decision making in the supermarket based on sustainability. They even follow a lot of websites in terms of which fish is sustainable and which is not. So they're ahead sometimes of the restaurant. But there we have a challenge because Swedish ingredients are almost too expensive for the local market, for Sweden. So there the job is really about making sure that how the vegetables and ingredients gets to us, that we really can cut out the middleman there again.
So you can lower
so
food
we can
costs
lower for
for-
food cost and making sure it's available at a decent price to our customer, right? So every place, there's completely different sets of challenges that are very local, and to be sort of local relevant and on the right side of sustainability is extremely challenging, but it's part of the work. It's part of the larger work that we do. And I think it's also part of the larger work why people come to our restaurants.
Yeah, absolutely. And the idea and the I think the belief and trust in you that you are taking these issues very seriously and that you can adapt them to every local market and address the issues of that community.
But that when I was growing up as a chef, I never thought that this was something we have to deal
chef
with.
just cooks.
Yeah.
Chef just cooks.
Great
But now-
ingredients, wherever they come from, put them on. Great flavors that are seasonal. So we, completely changed that. And I do think we're in the beginning of that time. So I think the only not good thing, but the only leveler with water issue in the world is that it happens in rich countries as much as poor countries. That means that all hands on deck and everybody's engaged in it. This is not something we can just ship away. And that means that the solution to better technology and products of this is going to be available much, much quicker.
Right.
And I think we as chefs in the 21st century is going to be the benefiter of that and can activate that in our restaurants.
Agreed. Emma, you have a predominantly seafood-driven restaurant.
Yes.
And so obviously that's very directly linked to issues of water sustainability and oceans and protecting oceanic wildlife. But you live in such an urban center. So how do you tackle those issues, and what are the issues at Aquavit that you are most challenged by in terms of sustainability and water conservation?
All right. I always keep a very close bond with my purveyors or purveyor. We have an open dialogue every day, a bunch of emails going back and forth about what fishes are or seafood are in season. We also talk a lot about if they're raised or if oysters are coming from farms, like how are they treating them, and how are some fishes are hard to find wild, and if I have to do farmed, I want to make sure that they're grown decent. They get to live their full lifespan till they mature. I don't want that farm where it's just about getting product out as fast as possible. I want to make sure they're happy, they get fed well, and it's a constant looking all the time. And it's also a communication where they will tell me that, hey, we have this really good couple up north who they take so much care about these guys, and they do everything ecological. And
You could probably say it in Swedish if you need to, and many people understand, except me, but I have translators.
So sourcing seafood, since it is basically almost 90% of my menu, I would even do more if I could. But I don't do any seafood that's not in season or endangered, and I tend to go for products as well that maybe are not being overused, and I'll try and source more wild-caught,
Do you find that over the years, and I know you switched from the pastry kitchen in this period, but that customers are asking more questions? Do you find that they're more educated? What are the questions you get from your customers about overfishing and the issue of conservation? Do you find that they know more than they used to, and what kind of things did they demand of you as a chef?
They do know a lot, and we get constantly getting questions about where the fishes are coming from, to the point where it's not enough to say outside of Long Island. They want to know exactly where or what boat is taking the fish up. So it is also important for us to take time and gather information and ask questions, not just to buy and not just to look at the price. Sometimes, or a lot of the times, it's worth paying more if I can get product in that I can be proud of. I don't want to. I want seafood to be around for many years to come. I don't want something to disappear out of the ocean. So if I get a heads up that lobster, for example, is starting to grow thin, I don't do it. And for me, it doesn't really matter if customers are asking for it, because I would never put something on my plate that I want to sleep at night.
Can't compromise yourself and the standards of the restaurant.
So
You need sleep. Sleep
need
is
sleep.
important. We all need sleep, absolutely. And chefs get probably the least sleep of anyone I know. And Fredrik, what about you? You talked a lot about the parallels between here and Sweden in terms of the environment. And so how do you think about sustainability as it pertains to foraging and incorporating the wilderness of New York City and the responsibility you have to sustainability from that perspective?
I mean, I think there's a sustainability aspect to that as well.
For sure.
If you want, if you're picking wild ingredients, not picking more than then
your share.
Then your share, and that's so that they can actually reproduce and survive for next season. I mean, often if you chop down the whole field, they won't have the ability to grow back, right? It makes sense.
Managing the proportion.
Yeah, exactly. So, but in our case, a lot of in a lot of what we pick in the wild would be sort of greens and herbs and shoots and items that are often, many of them are actually coming from sort of settlers, from European settlers a long time ago, and they don't have a natural predator, or so they grow in abundance, so we can actually often take as much as we want. They're weeds.
Bonus.
Without, yeah, right, so bonus. But otherwise, we too, you know, like we said, work with the farmers markets, work with, I bugged my fish purveyors so much, like I feel like we sometimes have to educate them on what, you know, what they, if it's, especially if there is a middleman, if there is a fish purveyor, we have to tell them what we want and what we don't want, and we have to make sure and like be on them to not lie to us. But otherwise, working with, a lot of it is common sense, but like working with fish from around New York, knowing, sort of have just a general understanding of what is endangered, what's not. And as far as vegetables, we, you know, our way of looking at food is still pretty vegetable driven, and the meat and the fish is sort of an accent to the vegetable rather than the other way around. Like Amanda said, 10, you know, for as long back as restaurants have been around.
Right.
So most of our menu, most of our vegetables on the menu, for example, we pick up at the market ourselves, and we go and, yeah, we spend a subway trip and IKEA bags going to the market rather than having trucks sitting in traffic on the Williamsburg Bridge, dropping off vegetables at the restaurant. That's because we can do that because we're a small restaurant. It's difficult when you're much larger, but I feel like as long as you're aware of a problem, an existing problem, and sort of just like just being aware and trying to address it to whatever degree you can. Like everyone in this room knows there's a problem. So
Right.
it's not only in the restaurants, of course. Everybody has to take their sort of personal responsibility to achieve this goal of reducing if it's carbon emissions or not overfishing the seas, etc. But and everything else in a restaurant. I mean, restaurants using a lot of water.
Yeah.
Or you know, they are using water, a lot of water. I feel like that also. I mean, again, just knowing the chemicals they're using, for example, in your business, knowing what you use on your counters, on your windows, on your what goes down the drain, what eventually ends up in the water system again. It's like if you don't want a product on your hands, on your clothes, or to open the bottle and put your face in it, it's very likely that you don't want to
Ingest it.
to use it in the restaurant either. I mean, it's going to have a negative impact on the environment
Right.
and health. So anyway, so that's just
What are,
asking a purveyor, knowing where the food is coming from, trying to work locally, trying to educate your staff in food waste, using products that are not, you know, not.
harmful?
I worked in restaurants where people you stand and picking through asparagus, and if it's a little bit on the crooked side, you go straight in the bin, and that's horrible. I mean,
It's almost these days, at a certain level, not allowed anymore. You know, there was a time in certainly New York's restaurant life not that long ago, and all over Europe too. You know, in the highest end of restaurants where that was the standard, and that you would be proud of only using the inside leaves. But now the thought for, I think, a certain level of chef, the thought of the waste, because it's become all of a sudden a topic that we cannot
crooked is
overlook.
good.
You become ostracized, that it's, you know, as you should be. If you aren't taking responsibility for every piece of food that comes in and then goes out of your restaurant and how it does so.
right.
What are a few things, just for fun, because I think that we would all be, I'm interested in hearing anyway, you can tell me if you're not, that are foraged and used in your restaurant that we all see every day in New York that no one would know are edible?
So they're edible. I mean, there are tons of things from, now. So you have to sort of, again, use common sense or know where you're picking your ingredients. I prefer to pick everything sort of outside of the city, even though Central Park has some very nice spots and even guided foraging tours if you want from people in Central Park. But they're everything from sort of berries and the flowers that grow on tree that have amazing scents, and like linden flowers are everywhere. They're delicious to make a tea with, almost like elderflowers. You have elderflowers and elderberries here. Different small apples, wild cherries. So lots of fruits and berries. There are weeds. There are weeds, many weeds in the onion family. Some with garlicky flavors, some with sort of spicy, peppery flavors, mustard flavors. There are, of course, mushrooms like oyster mushrooms and hen of the wood mushrooms and porcinis and ceps. And
you don't even have to go that far outside of New York, I would think. To find
I think even in the city itself, people are probably stepping on foods all the time that they could.
But to get the ones that necessarily.
Yeah, no, not at all. I think as soon as you cross the George Washington Bridge, right there. I mean, starting along the Palisades Parkway going north, or just going straight up going straight up through Harlem and up the Hudson. Yeah, it's the plants and.
Sure.
Stuff in abundance growing everywhere.
So Amanda, in your restaurant, a slightly different set of challenges, because the idea of talking to your purveyors about livestock isn't an issue, but that doesn't mean that you aren't up against rising food costs and the idea of sustainability with everything you source.
Right.
So what do you think is your main challenge in terms of sustainability?
Well, I look at it a little differently. So to me, I think of how is my restaurant even sustainable, sort of, and it's less about the product, but it's really hard these days to run a restaurant.
Especially like this moment in New York, I feel like.
This moment in New York, it's killing all restaurants. And I sort of, the beginning when we started this, we really looked inward and we were like, okay, we know we're about to face a lot of problems. How do we even take this idea that we have and that we love, and how do we make it sustainable? And when we moved to the new space, because we used to be a much smaller restaurant, there was all these things we wanted to do. We wanted to go visit farmers markets more, and we wanted to use smaller purveyors, and we wanted to really source our ingredients like properly. Because before I was like, whatever's at the deli, I'll just take it. And we realized it was actually exceptionally cost prohibitive for us. And people already think that my food is expensive. And if we, or they like to call it overpriced, I like to call it expensive. And it is just vegetables, but there's a lot of labor that goes into it. I have a huge staff that I am responsible for. And so what we did was we looked at our staff and we were like, okay, you know what? Because they were like, these are the things we want to do. We want to compost. We want to go to farmers markets. And we were like, great, you're getting 10% of the business. So we profit share with our entire staff. And what this does is it allows them to have a big say in how we run the restaurant. So if we even just take it down to the basics, like water, which is what we're here for, every time we run our dishwasher, it costs us money. It costs us money for products, and it costs us actual water money. We pay for water in the restaurant. And now, like, the person who washes the dishes, Jorge, he's like this dictator about it. He's like, I'm not putting that in. I need one more dish. He really is.
So
and
he now takes responsibility.
He totally takes responsibility. He's like, that's my profit.
Interest in the restaurant.
Yeah,
himself,
so
'cause he owns a piece.
Yeah, so we have very little waste now. People are really responsible about every single product they use, about not burning things, throwing things out, using every single part of the vegetable. And we're starting to build up this fund where we not only get to share with them, but we also are able to start buying better products.
Mm-hmm. Amazing, very forward thinking. Okay, before we have to, I don't know if we have time to take a question or two, but I have one quick lightning round question for all of you. If you could tell me one dish that's either on your menu or that that you eat for staff meal or that you have in the restaurant that you think right now incorporates and uses parts of an ingredient or the waste from another dish that you're particularly proud of, and that really kind of speaks to the ethos of your restaurant?
It might not speak to the ethos, but I feel like right now we have a smiley face salad it's really butternut squash salad that, nothing major with that, but I know what we have to do to get butternut squash to that market, and I know the person we buy, and I know if we wouldn't buy the amount of butternut squash, she wouldn't be at the market.
Right.
So we call it smiley face because she smiles and the way you slice it, but I also know the whole story behind it. And
So we should all eat the butternut squash salad.
smiley face.
Smiley face salad, because it keeps her in business and it keeps your community alive.
Yeah, and it's also to up like that market. I think about it when I walk by work, and I know we made a difference for that.
Amazing. What about you, Emma?
Wow.
I mean, it can be a fish
I was thinking about this so
you're-
much, but
you're excited about.
I think overall, in general, what I do with my produce and the way I cook is that I always look at it in 3 different ways. We use a lot of cod, for example. It's something that we pretty much almost always have on the menu, and it's a big fish, and not all of it. It's very good looking, and I have a specific dish where you wanted the big piece, the top. So, and that, it might be like 10% of the fish. So what do you do with the rest? And so it's always a constant thinking about splitting everything you have up. So some of it we're actually curing with berries that we preserved from summer, and we can use that product for another dish. And then a big part of it goes also for staff food every day. And it gives us a chance to take care of the people we're working with as well, who actually get to eat almost every other day this amazing product just straight up in the restaurant. So it's more about when I do create things that nothing goes in a waste, that you always use everything you have, and that goes with water as well. That we have. I constantly educate my staff that if you are blanching or if you are cooling down, that you should never use more than you need. When you see cooks like with this pot of water, and then all they're gonna do is blanch like 1 cauliflower head, and you're like, not just the water waste, but also the power and the gas
Sure.
and everything else that goes into it.
Learning to cook
But,
smart.
yeah, so I think for me it's more about utilizing
great
everything.
For sure. Frederick?
So a dish that.
A dish or an item on your menu, or perhaps an ingredient that you think really speaks to what your restaurant is about, and taking into consideration the sustainability that you work so hard to achieve? Is there an ingredient that you get? Or
Well, we.
I know that right now we should preface that his restaurant is temporarily closed. It's
Right.
reopening very shortly. So his menu might not be final at this moment
Right.
for this season.
Yeah.
But perhaps
but
an
it's-
ingredient or a purveyor that you work with or a forager that you work with that you think is an interesting sustainability story.
I would say perhaps going back to what's almost like a cliche, but using the entire ingredient, like using the entire animal, buying the pig and serving the pork blood. I'm going to work on our staff meal in the next restaurant. Our staff had none of our staff is here right now, but they I feel like we had very minimum waste, especially when it came to animal proteins. So they almost always had like a vegetarian staff meal made of leftovers from vegetable peelings, etc., which is but I think in general, I mean, I just think it's looking at a simple ingredient like the potato that comes from, you know, highlighting simple ingredients that are accessible and can be grown nearby, and somehow trying to make them special. Like a beef dish in the restaurant could be a simple burnt potato with a nice sauce and just a thin slice of beef that's been cured a very long time. So instead of using sort of size as a measure of if something is good or bad, you can use time as a measure of just sort of the efforts putting into making this special.
And the flavor.
And the flavor, yeah, which
creation,
comes with
right?
it. So, yeah, I don't know. We try to use time as an ingredient in itself, just to sort of make our make our
That's
products
interesting.
special. I don't know.
Nice thought. Yeah, important thought to think about, I think, because it's something that none of us have enough of.
Right, but then
Like that we don't think about how important time plays, the role time plays in creating food, and how it changes the flavor of food.
Right, and then if we clarify butter and we use the clarified butter for something, we would try to take the other part of the butter to use for something else.
Right.
For example.
Right. That's great. Amanda.
Carrot meringue pie. All right.
Carrot. What is it?
Our carrot meringue pie.
Carrot meringue pie.
We juice carrots. The juice goes into the curd of the pie. The pulp and the peelings of the carrot go into the crust of the pie, and the carrot greens go into the syrup on the bottom of the plate.
Good.
The whole vegetable.
Every ounce of carrot, and it's dessert.
And it's dessert, so it makes it even better.
But
perfect.
I think there's a common thread here, which is most of the time you get inspired by cooking from home, and then you go to we became chefs. But now it's actually a huge opportunity, and this is really for sustainability. If the consumer, it's a very simple thing that the majority can do. If you learn how to cook, right? Just the simplest thing. Just like we learn to speak languages and all the things. If you learn how to cook, these decisions for us as chefs becomes very clear. Yeah, you get a whole cod, you want to make a cod soup maybe the next day, you want to do dumpling the third day, or you want to use the whole carrots. But if the consumer, the majority of the population does this, that will have the biggest impact on the environment. So, you know, cooking, you know, and most people say they can cook a little bit or they can cook, but if you truly know how to cook, then you know also that vegetables going to be a bigger part. We got to try different types of protein, and we're going to learn to discover not just the cauliflower, but also the stem, or not just the carrot, but actually the stem, and you can pickle and preserve. So learning how to cook.
You taught me about pickling and preserving the stems of cauliflower,
there you
actually.
go. So learning how to cook, I think, is the globally most sustainable thing you can do.
Universally around the world.
Universally, because that will have the biggest impact, because if you get smarter consumer, this is not like an elite chef's thing. We can be the inspiration and the trampoline board for that.
Well, you become the leadership, and you have a platform because you are cooking publicly, and people can watch you, learn from you, and you have the opportunity to set an example for the public that will ultimately, hopefully, make an impact on the way we all cook, and ultimately, we hope, the sustainability of this planet.
And to teach the next generation how to cook also. If you do those two things, it will be greener, and we'll eat more farm, and we fork.
That's right, and we'll all have cleaner forks.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciated all of your time.
Thank you, Gail.
Thank you.
Good job.
Yeah.
Good job.
I wish we had all day to talk, because it just barely scratches the surface of what you do. But thank you. You're so much insight, I think, that even I learn, and I will be a better cook because of it.
Thank you,
guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Fantastic panel. Thank you very much. Thank you, Gail.